People think identity theft looks like a hacker in a hoodie. Most of the time, it looks like your best friend using the photo you took for your work badge and writing, "I'm spontaneous, love road trips, and hate small talk," even though you plan vacations in spreadsheets. I lived in Austin and managed product at a mobility startup, the scooters you dodge on South Congress. I was 29, methodical, and a little allergic to chaos. Friends joked I had a calendar for feelings. That's the profile of someone who attracts a certain archetype, the trickster friend. He's charming, improvisational, and way too curious about the consequences other people will carry. If you have a friend like that, you already know the vibe. You're the brakes, he's the gas. He pushes boundaries not to be cruel, but because novelty is his oxygen. You mistake momentum for loyalty, and let him borrow pieces of your life you should have locked away. When a friend impersonates you, it's rarely about romance. It's performance, testing how your persona lands in the marketplace. Here's the uncomfortable truth you avoid until it slaps you. People around you keep unspoken ledgers. They track what you project versus what you permit. If you present competence and permit overreach, you become the competent one who can be overreached. You might do this too, because it's easier, because you don't want the talk, because conflict feels like walking barefoot on gravel. Evan, my best friend since freshman year, was the pressure valve for every party I skipped. He teased me for optimizing my life, which is how I knew he loved me and also didn't understand me. In any friend pair, one person manages risk and the other manages vibe. The vibe manager tells himself he's expanding your world. The risk manager tells himself he's preventing disaster. Both are half right. And if you're the risk manager, you're the one who notices the first hairline crack. A DM from a coworker saying, "Didn't know you were on Rivet." Bold bio. Maybe you've felt that micro drop in your stomach, the instant audit of everything you posted, liked, or said in the last week. I clicked the link. There I was, photo from my friend's camera roll, my job title, a version of me that answered, "Dogs or cats?" with both in a Subaru. It wasn't cruel. It was frictionless. It was Evan. Stakes arrived in that tiny shiver behind my ribs. Reputation at work, HR questions, the fragile scaffolding of trust we'd built over a decade. I told myself I'd text him after my afternoon sprint review. Then a match from my profile showed up at our public launch event and waved like we'd already met. Crowded launches expose your architecture. You perform competence while scanning for fire hazards, missing signage, a flickering tablet, the intern about to plug a space heater into a power strip. Into that choreography walked a woman in a denim jacket and confidence you could feel from 6 feet away. Archetypally, she was the seeker, not reckless, but decisively curious. Seekers respond to signals. If you advertise availability, intentionally or not, they move toward it. You've probably met her type. She doesn't waste a night on "Baby," she said my name like a password. We matched. I watched a nearby design lead glance over. In workplaces, identity isn't just who you are. It's currency others spend to negotiate their own standing. A rumor can be a coupon. When your friend borrows your image, he's not just borrowing your face. He's opening an account in your professional credit line. Here's the tough part. If you live by systems, your shadow is improvisation. You secretly want to prove you can pivot without a plan. That's how people like me get trapped, by the desire to appear flexible at the exact moment boundaries are needed. I asked where we'd chatted. She showed me the app, Rivet, my fake profile grinning back. The bio copied phrases I'd used in old texts to Evan. That detail stung more than the photo. When betrayal arrives in jokes and borrowed lines, it feels oddly intimate, like someone wearing your jacket and finding cash in the pocket. If this ever happens to you, remember, clarity beats cleverness. Don't riff. Don't apologize for someone else. Name the problem. I told her it wasn't me. Her face did the tiny recalibration you see when a smart person updates a map mid-walk. She wasn't embarrassed. She was efficient. Then someone's using your stuff. You should report it. The seeker left me with 2 tasks. Fix the profile and address Evan. Most friendships have a constitution no one writes down. It says, in effect, we forgive pranks. We don't mess with income or dignity. Evan believed he was marketing me, loosening the brand. Tricksters think friction is therapy, but there's a line between stretching and substituting. The moment you let substitution stand, you teach everyone how to treat the original. I stepped into a quiet hallway, screens buzzing in the demo room like cicadas, and texted him one sentence. We need to talk about Rivet. His reply arrived before I could exhale. Dude, it worked. His reply was the trickster distilled, not apology, but proof of concept. It worked. That phrase is the anthem of someone who measures value in reaction rather than consent. Archetypally, tricksters are obsessed with doors. They want to know what happens if they're pushed, even when the sign says, "Do not enter." If you've got a friend like this, you know the ritual. He does. You contain, he shrugs, you repair. Until one day, the repair feels less like friendship and more like unpaid labor. I didn't answer him right away. Silence is a tool, but in friendships it can feel like escalation. At the launch, I still had to smile for photos, nod through speeches, and pretend I wasn't replaying every conversation Evan and I had ever had. How many other lines had he borrowed? Archetypal dynamics don't stay confined to one arena. If someone plays fast and loose in dating, they probably do it with money, time, promises. You can't compartmentalize character. That evening I biked to his place. He lived in a duplex off East 12th, the kind with lawn chairs that never matched. He opened the door grinning, phone in hand, ready to show me the matches. For him, it was data, a case study. Look, he said, scrolling. People think you're way more fun than you market yourself. It's disorienting when someone frames your boundary violation as a compliment. It's like a coworker who jokes about your salary in a meeting, packaged as flattery, delivered as theft. If you nod, you endorse. If you push back, you're too serious. I told him straight. He crossed a line. That's when his smile thinned into defensiveness. Tricksters, when cornered, pivot to jester. They pretend the stakes are low so you'll feel uptight for noticing. It's just an app, he said. But it wasn't just an app. It was my face, my name, my job. And reputation is fragile in ecosystems like ours. In startups, whispers travel faster than product updates. Archetypally, I was the guardian, keeper of order. Guardians often get painted as killjoys. But without us, things collapse. He promised to delete it, though his tone suggested I'd overreacted. That's the pivot point in many relationships. Is deletion enough, or do you require contrition? In that moment, I chose efficiency over depth. I left his porch with a handshake and a headache, telling myself it was handled. But archetypes don't vanish when you dismiss them. They circle back, testing whether you really meant the boundary. And sure enough, a week later, I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter. Saw your Rivet profile. Interesting how you positioned yourself. The recruiter's message landed like static in a quiet room. Interesting how you positioned yourself. That sentence carries weight when you're in tech. Positioning isn't just branding. It's how investors decide if you're a visionary or a liability. Archetypally, recruiters are gatekeepers. They filter, interpret, and sometimes misinterpret your signal to the wider market. When a gatekeeper references a version of you that you didn't create, it's not just awkward, it's dangerous. I typed, deleted, retyped. Explaining the fake profile felt like oversharing. But letting it slide meant the doppelganger version of me was now bleeding into my professional network. If you've ever had your narrative hijacked, you know the tug-of-war between clarity and damage control. Too much detail makes you look messy. Too little makes you look complicit. I settled on one line. That wasn't me. Someone close to me used my info without permission. Even typing it felt like peeling back skin. At work, the whisper mill accelerated. A project manager asked if I was branching out into networking apps. A developer joked about my side hustle. Each comment was small, but each one eroded a sliver of authority. Archetypally, every group assigns roles. I'd been cast as the architect, precise, predictable, the one who stabilized chaos. The architect's power is credibility. When that credibility cracks, the whole structure wobbles. That night I confronted Evan again. He shrugged like it was still funny. Come on, man. People are interested in you. I gave them a door in. Tricksters rationalize theft as generosity. They believe they're expanding your possibilities. The problem is, they don't pay the bill when expansion comes with collateral damage. I told him flat out, if he didn't delete every trace, I'd report him on the app and block him everywhere else. Friendship contracts are invisible until you invoke them. I saw in his eyes the first flicker of insult. that I treated him like a stranger. But here's the archetypal truth. Sometimes you need to enforce stranger rules with people closest to you. Otherwise, they never recognize the line. He finally agreed, though with the caveat only a trickster can deliver. Fine, but you're gonna thank me someday. I walked back to my apartment knowing two things. The profile might vanish, but the signal was already out there. And signals, once released, don't fully disappear. They echo. Deleting a profile is like sweeping confetti off wet pavement. You can make it look gone, but fragments stick. A week after Evans. Fine, I'll delete it. I still caught ripples. A colleague forwarded me a screenshot, asking if I'd pivoted to marketing myself as outdoorsy. That detail, me, supposedly hiking canyons at sunrise, was Evan's invention. Archetypally, that's the magician's shadow, conjuring a more exciting version of you, then convincing the crowd it's truth. The danger isn't the lie itself, it's the erosion of trust in your baseline. You've probably felt it, when people tilt their heads like they're not sure which version of you to believe. Do you correct every false note, or do you let the music play off key? Most of us surrender in small ways, hoping the noise dies down. That's how reputations bend, not from one loud strike, but from the steady pressure of rumor. At lunch one afternoon, my manager asked casually, "So you're single again?" The assumption startled me more than the question. Archetypally, managers sit in the ruler seat. They don't just supervise tasks, they monitor narratives. To them, an employee's personal life is data that hints at stability, distraction, or potential mobility. My denial felt weak, like trying to tape over a crack in drywall. He nodded politely, but the doubt lingered. Evan texted me that night like nothing had happened. A meme, a half-baked plan to grab tacos. That's the trickster's cruelty, continuity. He doesn't live in the debris he creates, so he moves forward unscarred. Guardians and architects, the roles I carried, don't get that luxury. We catalog every fracture. When I ignored his messages, he sent one line that landed harder than I expected. "Don't act like you didn't need this." That's the temptation baked into every trickster dynamic. They reflect the parts of you that secretly crave disruption. Was he right? Had I needed some crack in my rigid facade? Archetypes don't work in binaries. We're not all guardian or all trickster. We're blends. Maybe I did need shaking up, but needing it didn't mean he had the right to script it. I stared at his message, feeling the line between irritation and betrayal sharpen. The question wasn't whether he'd delete the profile. It was whether I could keep carrying a friendship where my identity was raw material for someone else's experiments. I didn't reply to his text. That silence wasn't passive, it was deliberate. Archetypally, silence is the judge's move. Judges don't swing wildly. They wait, measure, and let the absence of words do the cutting. For a week, I let Evan's memes and "You alive?" ping stack up like unopened mail. At work, though, the fallout lingered. A designer dropped a sarcastic, "Careful, he might write about you in his profile." Laughter followed. It wasn't cruel, but it placed me in a new category, the butt of a story I hadn't authored. That's how reputation shifts, quietly, then all at once. One moment you're the architect, the reliable guy who double-checks API calls. The next, you're the punchline in someone else's experiment. If you've ever been recast without consent, you know how hard it is to claw back authorship. Do you overcorrect and risk looking desperate, or do you let the caricature breathe and hope it dies on its own? The tipping point came at my cousin's engagement party. She introduced me to a friend with a wink and said, "You probably already saw his dating profile. Everyone has." That single comment cut deeper than the office jokes. Family is the archetypal mirror. They reflect not just who you are, but who you've been. When they carry secondhand versions of you, it distorts the whole lineage of trust. That night, I finally called Evan. No memes, no sidestepping. I told him he'd gutted something essential. That friendship isn't just hanging out, it's custodianship of each other's names. Tricksters hate that word, custody. It smells like confinement to them. He tried his usual pivots. "It was a joke. You're overreacting. You're welcome for the exposure." But exposure without consent is exploitation, no matter how small. Here's what most people miss. Tricksters aren't villains. They're catalysts. They force choices others avoid. In pushing me, Evan made me see the architecture of our friendship. I built, he tested. I protected, he played. That balance had worked until it didn't. And once you see the blueprint clearly, You can't unsee it. I hung up without resolution. For the first time in 15 years, the silence afterward felt heavier than the friendship itself. The silence stretched into weeks. At first it felt like holding my breath, but eventually it became a kind of clarity. Archetypally, this was the pilgrim stage, stepping away, even from familiar ground, to test what you can live without. When you've been orbiting a trickster for years, you don't realize how much energy you spend bracing for the next stunt until it's gone. My days felt quieter, lighter, though not entirely comfortable. At work, the teasing tapered off, but the residue remained. I noticed people watching me a little longer, as if trying to match me to the profile they glimpsed. Archetypes are sticky. Once you're cast as the comic relief or the oddball, traces linger even after the source disappears. I kept telling myself it was manageable, but the truth was, identity once fractured doesn't automatically reset. You have to rebuild it, brick by brick, in how you show up every day. Then came the email. A woman named Tessa reached out through my work address, thanking me for our great conversation on Rivet, and suggesting coffee. She was polished, articulate, clearly someone who'd read my invented profile carefully. It startled me not because she existed, but because Evan had apparently kept using my likeness even after promising to delete everything. Archetypally, this was betrayal, clean and undeniable. Guardians can rationalize a lot, but repeated violation strips away the buffer. I sat staring at her message, wondering how many other strangers carried impressions of me that weren't mine. It wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. It was about ownership. Who gets to narrate you? If you don't guard that, others will. And tricksters thrive in those gaps, where boundaries are porous and accountability is negotiable. I drafted a reply to her, short and factual. That profile was created without my permission. I apologize for the confusion. Hitting send felt like closing a door I hadn't opened in the first place. But with that door shut, another question pressed harder. What to do about Evan? Silence had delayed the choice. Now, I'd either have to escalate, or accept being someone's ongoing mask. Escalation doesn't come naturally to Guardians. Our instinct is to contain, patch, move forward. But containment without consequence just breeds repetition. Archetypally, I had to step into the warrior role, not swinging fists, but drawing a visible line. So I filed a report with the app. I sent screenshots, explained the impersonation, and flagged Evan's account. It felt both petty and necessary, like finally locking a door you'd hoped no one would test again. The company responded quickly. The profile was removed, and they warned the account holder about violating terms of service. It should have ended there, but Evan called me within hours, furious. You reported me? To a dating app? Do you know how ridiculous that looks? He wasn't embarrassed about the act itself. He was embarrassed that someone had called time on it. Tricksters rarely fear chaos. They fear accountability. Our argument circled the same themes. He framed it as harmless fun. I framed it as theft. He said I needed to lighten up. I said he needed to grow up. What struck me wasn't the disagreement, but how rehearsed it felt. We'd been playing these roles for years. Him pushing, me resisting. Both of us mistaking tension for connection. Archetypes aren't just patterns. They're grooves worn deep by repetition. For the first time, I told him plainly. If he couldn't respect the boundary of my name, there wasn't a friendship left to salvage. The line went quiet on his end, long enough for me to hear my own pulse. Then he muttered, "Guess you're not as fun as I thought," and hung up. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something closer to release. Tricksters lure you with novelty, but when novelty turns corrosive, the release becomes its own kind of freedom. Still, endings echo. In the following days, I caught myself scrolling through old photos of us, college road trips, barbecues, birthdays, proof that the friendship had been real, even if the pattern had become unsustainable. That's the paradox of closing a chapter with a trickster. They leave you with scars, yes, but also with sharper edges of yourself you might never have found otherwise. Life without Evan settled into something steady. My calendar looked the same. Sprint reviews, bike commutes, Saturday errands, but the undercurrent had shifted. Without his chaos orbiting me, I realized how much of my identity had been defined in opposition. Archetypally, this was the sage phase, recognizing patterns, extracting lessons, naming what had always been there. You don't see the architecture until the scaffolding is gone. yet his shadow lingered. At a networking event, someone joked, "Hey, no catfishing tonight." I forced a laugh, but inside I bristled. That's the cost of trickster interference. You pay in credibility long after they've moved on. It wasn't malicious. It was residue, archetype stain. And if you've ever had your image borrowed, you know the cleanup isn't external, it's internal. You start second-guessing how solid your self-presentation really is. To counter it, I doubled down on clarity. At work, I volunteered for projects where my signature was undeniable. Dashboards only I could structure, rollouts only I could smooth. In social spaces, I leaned less on deflection and more on presence. Guardians rebuild by making their reliability visible. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. People gradually stopped bringing up Rivet. The narrative shifted back to me. Then, one night, Evan resurfaced. A simple text. "Miss the old days. Beer?" That's the trickster rhythm. Vanish, then reappear with nostalgia as currency. Archetypally, nostalgia is bait. It tugs at the lover in you, the part that clings to shared history even when the present is fractured. And I felt it. 15 years of friendship doesn't dissolve cleanly. But here's what the sage knows. History is not a hall pass. Patterns predict futures. If someone's shown you their archetype over and over, believing they'll rewrite it without evidence is self-betrayal. I didn't answer that night. I just stared at the screen, aware that whatever reply I sent, or didn't, would be the true ending of the story we'd been dragging out for too long. I let his message sit overnight. In the morning, the phone felt lighter, like my silence had already written the answer. Archetypally, this was the closing act of the hero's journey, returning not with treasure, but with clarity. The treasure wasn't fixing Evan. It was recognizing I didn't need to orbit his chaos to validate my own stability. I typed slowly. "I can't go back to the old days. I wish you well, but I'm done." Hitting send felt like pulling the last nail from a structure that had been leaning for years. Final, quiet, undeniable. No fight, no clever quip, just a boundary carved into digital stone. He didn't reply. That silence spoke louder than any argument we'd had. Tricksters thrive on reaction, and withholding it is the only real consequence you can deliver. For weeks, I half expected him to reappear, but he didn't. And in that absence, something subtle shifted. At work, my reputation steadied. Friends stopped joking. Even family seemed to recalibrate, seeing me not as the caricature Evan had drawn, but as myself again. Looking back, I see the arc clearly. Guardians attract tricksters because we crave the spark they provide, while they lean on us for the stability they lack. It works until it corrodes. And when it corrodes, you face a choice: cling to history or honor the self you built. Most people avoid that decision, letting the cycle spin for years. I didn't. Bittersweet is the right word. I lost a friend who had been a brother for half my life, but I also reclaimed my name, my image, my authorship. In archetypal terms, I stepped out of the shadow of someone else's story and back into my own. That's not triumph, not entirely. It's quieter than that, but it's real, and it's mine.